Hello and welcome to the FinTech Finance Virtual Arena. I'm your host, Doug Mackenzie, and on today's episode, we're going to be looking at how we can make CBDCs or central bank digital currencies a reality. And joining me here today is Paul Wong from the Stellar Development Foundation. Paul, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing well, Douglas. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, Paul, and to have someone from an organization like yourselves, it's just so exciting. But for our audience who might not have heard about you before, could you tell us a bit more about your role there and the Development Foundation as well?
Absolutely. I'm the Director of Product for Central Bank Digital Currencies and Institutions at the Stellar Development Foundation. The Stellar Development Foundation is a nonprofit organization that seeks to develop and grow the Stellar blockchain network in support of a more open and more inclusive global financial system. The Stellar network is a trusted, high-performance-based blockchain that was established in 2015. And today, the network processes more than 5 million transactions a day.
Wow.
And with more than 12,000 unique assets. What makes Stellar unique among blockchains is its consensus mechanism. The Stellar protocol allows issuers to control how its assets are used and who chooses to provide validation services. And it does so with speed, efficiency, safety, and equally important at a low cost. Before joining the Stellar Development Foundation a few months ago, I spent 17 years at the Federal Reserve Board and the Bank for International Settlements. My central banking work has included everything from overseeing central bank payment operations to drafting international and domestic risk management standards for systemically important financial market infrastructures, to providing thought leadership on central bank digital currencies. More recently, I established and led the Federal Reserve Board's technology lab, which led the board's digital currency experimentation program, as well as coordinated work among the Federal Reserve banks on payment technology innovation.
Wow. I mean, with a resume like that, I'm honored to have you on the show, to be honest, Paul, because
you're incredibly kind.
Well, it's going to be such a discussion going into the future, and to have that historic knowledge of where they've been, CBDCs, and where they're going is going to be so critical. So thank you so much for joining. Now, with that in mind, are there different types of CBDCs, and are they as new as their attention suggests?
So this is a great question, and I appreciate the fact that we're starting off the conversation with foundational principles. Yeah. Oftentimes, it's actually not clear to me what folks are talking about until a few minutes into the conversation, and that's if I'm lucky. We lack a common, right? We lack a common lexicon for central bank digital currencies, which I think has made CBDC discussions extremely confusing, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
So let me start off by noting that, the views are my own and not those necessarily of Stellar or any previous employer. For me, central bank digital currencies is simply a digital version of a central bank liability. And we have CBDCs today in the form of central bank reserves. Central banks around the world operate real-time gross settlement systems, and they use digital currencies to affect those transfers between banks. In many countries, and actually, I would say in most countries, only certain financial institutions have access to that system and to central bank digital currency. So the question that central banks are trying to answer today is whether to expand central bank digital currencies to the public. How do we do it? With what technology? And what functionality are we going to allow with this potential new system? Lots of people have created frameworks for us to think about a taxonomy for CBDC, right? So there's lots of conversations around wholesale versus retail CBDC, direct versus hybrid, tiered versus non-tiered, and the like. But for me, I think what we should think about is really the underlying technology for CBDC. As I noted, from my perspective, we have CBDC today, and many central banks can open access to their systems relatively easily, or at least much easier than building another system.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's what people are talking about, right? People aren't talking about central banks opening its large value payment systems or its real-time payment systems to the general public. people are talking about something that is more than that. For example, I'll just highlight that the Federal Reserve is building an instant payment system that is expected to launch next year. The system will allow consumers to make instant payments to each other. It will use an intermediated model, which means that we'll still need to maintain a relationship with a bank to use that system. And if we simply wanted a CBDC in the United States, the Federal Reserve could turn FedNow into a CBDC product. So if you can imagine your FedNow account being a liability of the central bank instead of the commercial bank that is managing the relationship, we're kind of done. And turning FedNow into a CBDC solution is simply about changing the financial and legal structure of the account relationship. No new systems need to be replaced.
I mean, when I think the Federal Reserve is processing, I think last time I checked, it was $49 trillion annually, then suddenly FedNow and what that can do going forward is just going to be huge. And that actually leads me on to my next question, and that's outlining, and this is something that I love to have on the show, is actually some of the key benefits, the use cases that you think will arise from making these a reality.
So that's an incredibly hard question.
Apologies.
I think what we're really doing today is building a new financial superhighway. And I think what we're doing is incredibly exciting. So, from my perspective, I think we're basically operating on a 2-lane highway that was built in the 80s or 90s that have been repaved several times over. In some cases, we've been able to expand that highway to 4 lanes. We've built new highways to handle different asset classes, but otherwise, fundamentally, not much has changed over the last few decades. Today, our financial highway is somewhat siloed, right? Payments are on one highway, securities on another, and commodities on yet another. And the structure exists for a number of reasons, including, for example, technological limitations, regulatory constraints, legacy systems, the list goes on. Innovation, however, is really challenging the current arrangement. The blockchain community today is working to build multiple financial superhighways with 8 to 10 lanes accommodating a number of different users. These highways are being able to accommodate more than just freighters and cars, for example. They will hopefully allow for walkers, bikers, autonomous vehicles, whatever you can think of.
Wow.
And if you step away from, my not well thought through superhighway analogy, what we're doing is really creating a new financial and economic platform. Blockchain is really allowing us to rethink how we record information, how we maintain records, how we do business. So if you can imagine a world where we can send payments at almost zero cost across borders, if you can imagine a world where anyone can access the capital markets to fund businesses, if you can imagine a world where we are in control of our assets, it's an amazing future. And the superhighway that I'm talking about is currently being done by the private sector. Central banks can kind of engage in this activity as well and build its own superhighway. And in many cases, it actually might be more effective for a central bank to do so than the private sector. The benefits of a CBDC, from my perspective, will vary by jurisdiction. An appropriately designed CBDC will really accelerate innovation that will come from this space. At the same time, a really poorly designed CBDC will really limit growth and innovation. And this is why we really need to be careful when we think about introducing a CBDC. We need to understand what it's designed for, how it's designed, and its purpose.
Yeah, I think to hear that is so good, because while, as you mentioned, the private sector has taken the crypto scene with gusto, when you start involving central banks, entire governments, things need to go at a more measured pace. So speaking about that process then, what is your advice? What is your idea about how this ongoing consultation, this ongoing discussion about the implementation should go? Because we've seen the private sector run with leaps and bounds, but who should the kind of public sector look to discuss with them?
You're asking really hard questions today.
Sorry, it's on just before a bank holiday.
Exactly. I think from my perspective, I think as I just noted, CBDCs can be a catalyst for innovation and positive change,
Yeah.
or it can lead to, poor or possibly disastrous results. How do we avoid disastrous results? We need to have significant and broad consultation. Designing a CBDC is all about trade-offs, and these trade-offs need to be made with the people. How much information do we as a society want to share with government? Where should our data live? How should our privacy be protected? There's so many issues that need to be addressed before we can issue a CBDC. And here, I want to emphasize that we need to have broad stakeholder engagement. This includes reaching out to that 5-person startup working on decentralized financial applications, the 100-person crypto foundation, the 20-person nonprofit focus on financial education, and even the 200-person fintech unicorn. These organizations are essential to consult, in addition to the big tech and the large financial institutions that are already engaged in significant lobbying and consultation efforts. The reason why I'm calling out the small players is that they typically don't have the resources or the network to influence policy decisions and policymakers. But policymakers really need to consult with them because they're the ones who are affecting change on the ground. Since joining Stellar, I've really seen a different side of the crypto industry that for me was hidden from view. And that's the number of ecosystem players out there. There's an incredible amount of people and companies working to build this new financial rail that we've been talking about. And, of course, I was generally aware of the developments happening in the space, but before I got to the Stellar Development Foundation, I didn't really appreciate the breadth and depth of innovation that is going on in this space.
Yeah, it really does seem, and I almost hate using the phrase, it is a holistic innovation. It is the mom and pa shops of the crypto world that are right at the forefront of this change. But you could also apply that not just across verticals or across class. You can apply this across the world, and we're seeing some really exciting use cases and countries really kind of grapple with it in quite an exciting way. So I don't suppose if you've in a kind of not 2-sentence or less, but where are you seeing some really exciting lessons that, for instance, the United States or United Kingdom can learn from when it comes to CBDCs?
In my humble opinion, I don't think we're very far when it comes to CBDCs. We're still at the beginning stages. Many early pilots have not passed the test of time, with possibly a few exceptions. Many jurisdictions have been studying CBDCs for a few years now. They've experimented with it, and nothing has really gone to full production. This, to me, suggests several things: that CBDC may not be right for all jurisdictions. The use case for CBDC is still being determined, and equally or more important, building a CBDC is really hard.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. And just when you factor in all the different parts, the fact that you have to consult with so many people, as we've just discussed, to your main point as well, is there's so many different types of what a CBDC could be and used for. Suddenly the discussion becomes just infinitely more difficult. Now, why is improving existing payment systems as an alternative not enough? Have we actually gotten to the point now where you can create RTP, you can create instant payments, you can do all you want over these traditional payment rails, as you alluded to, that have been paved over from technology maybe 70 years ago? Have we actually now gotten to the point where that isn't enough?
So, again, another great question. Let me just start off by saying that I think improving the existing payment system is fundamental. In the near term, in the medium term, financial markets will continue to operate and rely on existing payment systems. And in most jurisdictions, these core systems will still be the most secure and robust systems around and will be continued to be used. So it's fundamental that we continue to invest in existing systems. At the same time, we need to think about the future and what that looks like. Existing systems have limitations. Those limitations center, from my perspective, on the lack of access and unlimited functionality.
Yeah.
Like everything else, we can create workarounds, and we have, which explains our current existing system of having siloed highways, of having patch technology systems.
Yeah.
So, To answer your question of why improving existing payment systems as an alternative to CBDCs is not enough, I think from my perspective, in some jurisdictions it may be. It just depends on the particular of the jurisdictions. In the United States, as I noted, FedNow is being introduced. Is it good enough? Possibly. But CBDCs can be a catalyst for innovation. So is it enough? Who knows? I'll just note that it's going to take a lot of time for CBDC to be introduced in certain jurisdictions. In the United States, it appears that it will take legislative and executive change to make that happen, which will take time. So in the meantime, we need to continue to invest in our existing infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that we bring up FedNow because I believe that there hasn't been a federal change in the payment systems for half a century. So it really does kind of scream that, okay, things are changing and moving. Now, do you think CBDCs will actually replace this kind of private impetus that we've seen, this innovation that's come from the private sphere? Do you think CBDCs are actually going to go on and replace stable coins, replace the current cryptocurrency crop?
But I don't think so. And I think it's important to consider that we use different forms of money today, not just central bank money. So, in fact, you and I probably use commercial bank money and non-bank money more than we use central bank money. Yeah. I rarely carry cash, and I only use it when there's no other form of payment is accepted. Commercial bank money, as you know, are the transactions that we make with our bank accounts. Non-bank money are things like PayPal, Venmo, and even our Starbucks card. In my opinion, stable coins and cryptocurrencies that are used for payments are different forms of commercial and non-bank money, and they're here to stay.
Absolutely amazing. And it's such an important point to bring up, is the fact that, so long are people to have just assumed that the central bank is behind all fiat currency. And just because I'm using the pound sterling doesn't mean that, it's running through those same channels. Now, with that in mind, then, with the advent of fintech and the increased interest about CBDCs from the central banks, certainly the ECB, the Bank of England are certainly looking. What approach should be taken by central banks to assess the viability of CBDCs? And this does go back to one of the hard questions I brought up earlier, but maybe just within the UK or maybe in the United States, where do you see these central banks looking to use CBDCs? What's the use cases for those two areas?
So for advanced economies that already have an instant payment system like the US or the UK, the viability for issuing a CBDC is a bit more challenging to assess. Advanced economies like the US and the UK have more complex financial markets and more moving parts. The key question that I would ask is really, what is our vision for the future? What is the central bank's vision or role in that vision? What role does a central bank play in affecting that vision? And these are all questions that I think central bankers at the Fed and the Bank of England are thinking about. I think in my humble opinion, I think of a lack of a CBDC might actually create more innovation in America and also in the UK. If we go back to sort of my highway analogy at the beginning of our conversation, what we're really talking about is building a new train tunnel between New York and New Jersey, or adding a new runway at Heathrow. And the logistics coordination and effort is huge.
Yeah,
it's huge. We need to decide on a number of factors as a number of implications. And in many ways, what we're doing in the US and the UK in thinking about CBDC is really building out new infrastructure on the scale of a highway or a tunnel or an airport.
Amazing. Well, it seems like the time of the FDR of bankers has come in. So Paul, we've come to time, but I just want to say a massive thank you, because I feel like even though we talk at FinTech Finance about this sphere a lot, it takes someone of your expertise to really kind of showcase and break down some of those analogies. So I've just got to say a massive thank you to you, and also a massive thank you to our audience as well. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at ffnews.com, and of course YouTube, but especially LinkedIn, where you'll obviously see me in the comments. Paul, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed yourself too.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been incredible fun.
Amazing. Thank you. And we hope to have you on again. So thank you very much and goodbye.